Let's take a look at these examples to see what the common theme or common error is between them. So the book is written by 16 lawyers, which have all studied this issue in depth, so you should cite the source with confidence. Notice here we're using this word which to refer to lawyers. The problem is, though, you have to use who to refer specifically to people. So the correction we would make here is this word who for which. The juggler who I wanted to meet turned out to be a real jerk. So what's going on with this one? The juggler who I wanted to meet turned out to be a real jerk. This one's a bit subtle, but it actually should end up being the juggler whom I wanted to meet. Who, sure, it's referring to a person, but we have to use the who form in this case, and I'll explain why in a second. We spent almost 3 hours deciding whom is the best candidate. Here, we actually want to have who, and again, I'll explain why in a bit. Although the comic book collector refused to honor the deal that we made at the convention, what? Notice we've got this, what we'll define in a second as a relative pronoun here, that, but we actually have a fragment here. This is not a complete sentence. What we could do is, although the comic book collector refused to honor the deal that we made at the convention, we can either get rid of the although, our subordinating conjunction, or we can add a comma and complete the sentence. The point is, as written, it's a fragment, even though we have this clause here with this noun and this verb, we made, even though we have that, this is still a fragment because it's still waiting for, still dependent on an independent clause. So what do these all have to do with? These all have to do with what are called relative clauses, and more specifically in these cases, the relative pronouns that you use to modify these nouns and that compose these relative clauses. So relative clauses modify nouns and pronouns. They begin with relative pronouns, and here are the set: which, that, who, whom, and whose, or relative adverbs, which you don't really see very often, but theoretically could appear, and they include where, when, and why. And as we've seen in the previous video, they can either be essential or non-essential, these clauses, depending on the meaning, as we've discussed. So let's look at some examples. You can use the car, which is parked in the front garage, to drive the circus. Notice how this compares to you can use the car that is parked in the front garage to drive to the circus. The rule here is you use which when it's non-essential, and therefore you use it with commas, and you use that when it's essential, and therefore we don't use commas. And notice again the difference between these sentences. You can use the car, which is parked in the front garage, to drive to the circus. The fact that the location of where the car is parked is non-essential indicates that there's really only one car we're talking about here. We both understand which car we're talking about. I don't have to specify it any further. I tell you, oh yeah, by the way, it's parked in the front garage, but it's really not essential. I could get rid of this and say, you can use the car to drive to the circus. We know then which car is being referred to. Compare this to the second one. You can use the car that is parked in the front garage to drive to the circus. This is indicating that I have more than one car. So I have to specify you can use the car that is parked in the front garage, that car over there, to drive to the circus, as opposed to the one parked in the backyard or the one parked in the street, right? Here it's essential because I need to specify the specific car. It's like what we looked at in the previous video with the brother in the army. If I have one brother, I don't need to specify which brother it is. If I've got more than one brother, I do, and that makes a difference in whether it's essential or non-essential. Let's look at some other examples. I spent the last 2 weeks memorizing 3,000 Portuguese words, many of which I've already forgotten. This uses which, again, to refer to these words. Notice a little bit of a different structure here. You can use this structure where you basically attach your relative pronoun to a preposition like of very often, and this whole phrase refers to the words, right? Many of which, many of these words I've already forgotten, and you can attach sentences like this. It's totally fine, and we will see examples of this on the test. Mr. Biggs the beagle, who used to live in the shelter, ate the entire roll of toilet paper. So you can use who with people, as we've discussed, but you can also use it with animals who are specifically named particularly. So who would be fine. You wouldn't want to use which here. That's awkward. In fact, almost always you're going to use who with animals, especially if they're personal animals like dogs and cats and things that have, personality or a name in particular. Bugs, for example, maybe you would use which. So the spider which I crushed with my boot, whatever. In that case, you would use which. You wouldn't use who. That's a bit odd unless you had a relationship with that spider. The SAT will never make you choose between that, though, for animals. Just know there's nothing wrong with using who with animals. The stranger whom I saw yesterday left behind a bag of gold. So this gets into the who and whom thing, which I also discuss right here. So let me just delay the discussion of whom. We will come back to this when we actually get into the longer discussion of this. But whom could be a relative pronoun. That head's a relative clause as well. My father, whose favorite sport is golf, hit a hole in one today. Here, the whose is referring to the father, but it's indicating possessive aspect, right? It's his favorite sport. So my father, whose favorite sport is golf, no problem. Here, we're using relative adverbs. The Great Depression was a time when many people suffered. The thing about when is it must refer to times. So here it clearly refers to the word time, but it could refer to a specific day, it can refer to a date, it can refer to a period of time, but when has got to refer to times. I traveled to France to see the chateau where my father grew up. Here, where, as you might expect, has got to refer to place. So here it's referring to a chateau. It can refer to a country, a city, a particular location, but it's got to refer to locations. I don't know the reason why she left. Very unlikely you'll see anything like this but on the test, or that you'll be tested on it, but I wanted to give you an example just so you can see how why could be used. It's got a very limited use as a relative pronoun, but nonetheless, here it is. So who and whom, I promised about this, so let's take a look at this in more detail. When do you use who versus whom? The first thing we need to define is the antecedent. And we'll talk more about this when we get into pronouns, but the antecedent is the noun that a pronoun refers to or stands in for. Remember, a pronoun is a word like he, she, it, who, whom, that is targeting or standing in for another noun. And we call that noun that's referring to the antecedent. So when you're determining whether you have to use who or whom, you have to ask yourself this question. Is the antecedent doing the action? Or is the antecedent the target or the beneficiary of the action? In other words, is the antecedent the subject or is it the object? Is it the subject of the action? Is it the thing doing the action? Or is it the object? Is it the target of the action? So let's go to our examples above. The juggler who I wanted to meet. Okay, so who is referring to the juggler? Is the juggler doing the meeting? No, I am the one who want to do the meeting. I am the subject. The juggler is the target, is the object of my meeting. It's the person I want to meet. Therefore, they are the object, and therefore we use whom. So if it turns out that the antecedent is the target of the action, as it is in this case, you use whom. If it's the subject, if it's doing the action, you use who. So for example, Mr. Biggs the Beagle, who used to live in the shelter. So the beagle is the one living in the shelter. It's doing the action, so you use who. So those are our examples. I believe I had one over here as well. We spent almost 3 hours deciding who is the best candidate. So here, the doer, or in this case, the beer of the action is the people we're talking about. So they are the best candidates, or he is the best candidate. They are the subject. This is the subject form. So therefore, we want to use who and not whom, because we are not targeting. They are not being targeted with the action of being the best candidate. They simply are, or he is the best candidate. She is the best candidate. Therefore, given that structure, you would use whom, or use who, no M. Let's look at some examples of these. According to Box, a leading Greenland expert, tundra fires in 2012 from as far away as North America produced great amounts of soot. Some of it drifted over Greenland in giant plumes of smoke and then fell as particles onto the ice sheet. So here, what we actually have in the original is a comma splice. We've got two complete sentences separated with just a comma, no good. So we get rid of A. If we delete it, we're going to have the same problem. Some drifted over Greenland in giant plumes of smoke. It's still a complete sentence, still a comma splice. As well, if we swapped out soot and said some soot drifted over Greenland, we still have a comma splice. So all three of these are all comma splices, and that actually helps you eliminate to the final answer, which is going to be C. And notice this is that structure we talked about before. Some of which referring to the soot, drifted over Greenland. And we can connect it with just a comma because this is not a complete sentence. It's not an independent clause. So you can attach phrases and incomplete clauses like that to a sentence with only a comma. So the punctuation is fine. The use of the relative pronoun is fine. We would go with choice C. So here's a who and whom question. The article goes on to suggest that the most valuable resources provided by co-working spaces are actually the people whom use them. So whom is referring to the people. People is the antecedent, right? Are the people doing the action, or are they being targeted with the action? And here, they're doing the action. They are the ones using the space. So therefore, we have to use who and not whom. Now, is it who uses or who use? We'll get into this when we go into subject-verb agreement, but it's going to end up being who use because we're talking about people. People is plural, so we would say people use them. So therefore, we would say people who use them. It all links together. So we'll talk about that when we get into subject-verb agreement. But for now, we know that who has got to be correct. Who has got to be correct. 43, that these skills are transferable across professions, which makes them especially beneficial to 21st century students. We have here a fragment in the original. Now, the sentence starts with that. This is actually a different use of it's not actually a relative pronoun in this case, it's just a different use of the word that, which can be used in many different ways. This basically is standing in for the fact that. So we can read this as the fact that these skills are transferable across professions, which makes them especially beneficial to 21st century students. We actually have no complete sentence here. So in fact, if we delete the which we would do in choice D, we get rid of this fragment problem. And we talked about this before in the previous sentence. One of the things we could do to fix it is delete the relative pronoun in order to make it a complete independent clause. So here we would say that these skills are transferable across professions, makes them especially beneficial to blah, blah, blah. This whole phrase here, this whole clause, which basically we can also read as the fact that these skills are transferable, is basically the subject of this verb makes. So we don't need the which there because the which causes a fragment. That would cause a fragment in the same way. And would cause the fragment, as we've seen before, because we don't actually have a verb that this connects with in the previous part of the sentence. So the only one that works here is D. We delete it, and everything works great.